Hi, Tim. Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Shankar. It's great to be here with you today.
Absolutely. Thanks for making time to have this chat, Tim. I've been looking forward to it. I know we rescheduled it a couple of times. Here we are, finally. Couldn't be happier to have managed to find time to do this with you. So, we're going to spend next 5 to 10 minutes, for as long as you want, to talk about satellite data and how it makes difference to the world we live in. And we'll talk about your role with us, Eartheye Space. So, as an introduction, I'm the founder. For those who are listening, I'm the founder of Eartheye Space, and we founded the company about two and a bit years ago to essentially remove the friction associated with using satellite data in solving earthly problems. My past life, I had worked across a number of new space companies, and I saw this particular accessibility, affordability, usability issues associated with satellite data. Tim is very passionate about climate, sustainability, and transparency. And I've known Tim since 2017 when I was at Planet, and we just hit it off. So he's actually been very kind with his time and advising Eartheye Space. So particularly this morning or this afternoon, we are going to talk about what he sees as our contribution to the themes that he's very passionate about. Once again, climate, sustainability, and transparency. So with that as a background, so Tim, you have a background in space with your PhD in aerospace. You are associated with the Space Association of Australia. You've been a chair, now you're a board member. You're very active with Cicada Space in Australia. You mentor several companies. You're also digital transformation CTO. I could just keep talking about everything you do for the next 10 minutes, but I'll stop here. So what is your view on space and digital in general? And what do you think they unlock together, if you believe they unlock something together? And finally, what is the role of AI in all of this?
Great question. So I'll try to take them in sequence. Thank you for that introduction. I've had the privilege of living through the era of digital transformation, showing my age. And while I worked in the space industry for a while back in the 20th century, I then had a 20-year career in that digital arena. And then before coming back towards space, because I saw that the data and services that we can create that can give us a total planetary perspective are absolutely essential to making the right decisions. I'm a believer that the scientific method applies, that if we have good facts that we trust, and if those facts can be analyzed and questioned and debated, but ultimately agreed on, which is the scientific method, then we will make smart decisions about how to look after this planet. And also that those decisions will also affect how we manage our society, keep our democracies healthy, keep the debate at the level of policy rather than personality. And so for me, the entirety of space and digital actually plugs into the way that we live in the 21st century and how we protect and nurture that and all the natural systems that we rely on to keep our food and water healthy and clean and help our young people, our children, our grandchildren, and future generations thrive. And so for me, space and digital have outsized influence, outsized power, and we need to make those things transparent to everybody.
Fantastic, fantastic. So I'm going to come back to that transparency and democracy and what it means today, right? And the facts versus the fiction and how space can help, but also the challenges the satellite operators face when they work with defense entities in countries at the same time want to support democracy and transparency. There's always that middle ground, and a lot of operators, including some of the companies I worked for, struggled. But we'll come to that in a minute. But because you are an impact investor and an advisor to many companies, what do you look for in companies, given what you just said? In companies you're investing and advising, what do you look for in these companies with vis-a-vis some of these themes you are passionate about?
So I look primarily for the something unique about the technology approach of the company and equally a humility and readiness to learn on the part of the founding team from their customers. I believe that if you are trying to sell a product or service to your customers, actually you should understand the benefits that you're going to deliver even better than those customers. So this combination of kind of ambitious technical person who has great ideas, has managed to get hold of some great IP or generate some IP and create a great MVP or create an initial service. And at the same time, they're prepared to torch that if it doesn't match what the market wants, what the customers are saying, and or what the customer really are looking for benefits. And those things, it's a kind of a chemistry. At early stage, it really is a gut feel. If anyone tells you that early stage investing is about analyzing the market, analyzing the financials, going through all those details, no, it's always a gut feel. Those are the things that my gut looks for.
Wow, that's very insightful. I mean, I can relate to it. We were going to be a marketplace, we trashed it, and we pivoted to what we are doing today, right? So it's very interesting. Thank you for that perspective. I'm sure, just like us, many other companies will benefit from that. Now, I'm going to get specific about some of those areas that you are passionate about or you talked about, Tim. So let's talk about climate change. So you talked about security of food, water, etc. So what are your thoughts on the recent COP announcement about a global carbon credit standard? And I ask this because there's been a lot of noise in the market about using forest and carbon credits as a way of offsetting pollution everywhere else where there's pollution. So this whole idea of offsetting, are you skeptic? You're a believer? Or you say, nah, that's not the way to save the planet?
I'm a believer. I actually think that these policies are extraordinarily creative. They are driving investments by oil and gas companies. Oil and gas companies can be cynical and say, oh, yeah, that's a good approach to whitewash. They're still going to be giving money to people who are building MVPs, creating solutions and testing and experimenting. And so I trust that that flow of cash from the polluters to those who are mitigating pollution and creating new systems, actually, we need to increase that. And at the same time, I think that policy has driven, especially in the Australian agricultural community, a real awareness that that's also what the consumers want. And that's what the market wants. The consumers want clean food. They want ethically produced food. And so the more transparency we show on the ways that we've been living, the ways that we've been scaling and industrializing agriculture, I think the more the consumer wants to turn away from that towards something that's more thoughtful, more sustainable. And good marketers, good brands have latched onto that. Good brands have said, do you want to feed food to your family that is healthy, that is going to make them feel well, that is going to make them feel better? And so I think that's an unstoppable force. And there's a beautiful linkage from that to this policy mechanism that has had these two dimensions: informal carbon credits from the likes of Gold Standard and Vera, and formal carbon credit systems like the Australian system, like the European system. So it takes leadership, and the European Union and their Scope 3 emissions is a fantastic precursor to now proposing that we all get on the same page and figure out if we can come up with a global standard price for carbon emissions, and back that, of course, with scientific evidence, back that with ways to baseline, ways to prove additionality and permanence, ways to ensure that we're squeezing out progressively the gappy and crappy data, or the data that's not so, or the methods of measurement that are perhaps not so credible. And we're identifying those methods that are working the best. And that's a journey. It's not going to be right at the outset. It's not going to be perfect. It's not like some of the other instruments in the financial markets. And so I think a lot of the commentary has come from a place of ignorance or a place of short-term thinking. A lot of the negative commentary around carbon credits. I think when you dig into the market behaviors that we're seeing, you dig into the pressure that's increasing and ratcheting up on organizations that are involved to be doing things in good faith, governments and companies and initiatives. I think that pressure is ratcheting up, and I believe in that pressure. So I'm a believer, and I'm excited that Eartheye is playing the leadership role in this area that it is.
Thank you, Tim. So I think that's a great segue, because I was going to ask you what role do you think the satellite data particularly plays in a lot of what you just said about good faith, transparency, additionality, permanence. So how should the satellite data be used to provide confidence to the markets and the people who are buying the offsets to know that it is legit, right? So that's been one of the issues, right? Because people have bought offsets in some countries and remote areas, and they have found on hindsight that they are not. They never contributed to any additionality, or actually, on the contrary, they were logging going on, as an example. So, what role do you think satellite data should play?
The fact that we know that there are those problems, the fact that those problems have been identified, observed, catalogued, and reported is a sign, in my view, that the system is working. You're
Right.
not going to get perfection from day one. You're going to get a whole spectrum of outcomes, some of them terrible, some of them great. But the fact that we have actually got a measurement framework around these outcomes is actually, I see it as a positive. So I'm a very glass half full kind of person. I'll take your question down to a specific person or a specific persona, a high performing farming organization, an individual farmer or a company that's doing very, very well. What you find, especially in the Australian condition, I'm sure it's true around the world, is those farmers are actually already using quite advanced agricultural processes. Advanced as in permaculture, advanced as in thinking about how they intervene in the landscape to preserve the value of that land. Advanced in the sense that they're also managing the variability of weather, of other inputs and outputs better than their peers. And these folks are actively engaging in the carbon market. They're now, what's the impact of satellite data? Right now, many of these people are paying, potentially up to $20 a hectare to lab baseline the amount of carbon, the pH, and all sorts of other variables in their soil. And that cost really needs to come down to pennies in the dollar, not be $20 a hectare. It needs to be like 5 cents a hectare for this to really be globally scalable. And so satellite data is an unprecedented or an unmatched vantage point, viewpoint, the way it is the ultimate high ground for capturing large swathes of data and repeating and managing the change detection process over time. So I find that satellite data is absolutely essential. And in the conversations I've had from farmers, they are expecting that satellite data is going to allow them to baseline at scale, to compare climatic zones, to compare the rate at which a given amount of water impacts the soil, creates then the conditions to absorb carbon permanently. They see that, and so they want data from all sources. They want it on the ground, they want it from drone platforms, they want it from high altitude pseudo satellites or HAPS, and they want it from space. And so I see Eartheye and what you're doing is absolutely critical to giving them the most coverage of that data set and pushing down the cost per hectare for those users. And that is going to then underpin the credibility, the integrity of this data system.
Right. No, absolutely. We always find, as you said in the beginning, you got to talk to customers, give what they are struggling with, and we found or solve the problems, issues they are struggling with. We found affordability, to your point, was one of the top of the mind issues for using or not using satellite data. But very closely, sometimes I feel it's more important than affordability is the usability. It's not just don't just give me lots of data, tell me the information from which I can derive my own insight or my decision. So one of the things we've started doing on our platform is to automatically extract information such as very simple indices, NDVI, to tell you about the greenness or the chlorophyll levels on the plantage, on your plants or crops, or more importantly, in the forest and plantation context, we now count trees. Because when a tree gets cut down, you just don't know what area the trees are cut down, but how many trees are cut down, which again, to your point about being very accurate with these credits, mean you need to know how many trees are cut down and not just how many hectares got cut down, right? So we go down to that level of micro information, if I can put it that way. So yeah, absolutely. These are things I think we need to help the users with. Now let's switch gears to sustainability, Tim. That is a great perspectives on climate change, but they're all sort of related, two sides of the same coin. What does sustainability mean in your context? Because it's just more than climate change, I think, having listened to you in the past. So what does sustainability mean to you? And where do you continue to see this unsustainable human activities? And once again, how does satellite data help to sort of spotlight those issues around unsustainable human activities?
So I think my very big macro picture came from the Gupta report which was a report, quite an arcane Dasgupta, it was called the Dasgupta Review, that was an independent review on the economics of biodiversity,
Mhm.
led by Professor Sir Partha Dasgupta. And it was a review, would you believe, of accounting standards. And that was something that really affected me. And the basic premise of this review, the conclusion was that we need to include nature on the balance sheet of our countries, of our corporations. We need to include it as a critical input to our economic models. And we need, if we can kind of bring that in as an accounting standard, that's going to reveal whether that resource is finite or infinite, whether the things that we are doing are too extractive and are not renewing or nurturing that system. And so that was kind of a very hard-nosed accounting analysis of the value of nature and how we have not been accounting for that. And so that impressed me mightily. And in fact, the UK has had this sort of global leadership position around accounting standards internationally. And so it was sort of really struck this sort of apolitical analysis took place. And so for me, sustainability was, it sort of needed to match up to, how we want to pay for things, how we want to account for things. And it had to fit into how business is done. Obviously, the other aspect is the idea that there are boundaries, there are limits to how much water we can extract from the earth. There are limits to how much pollution that we can release into the environment. There are hard limits in some cases of the chemicals that we can use. There are hard limits in how much we can add fertilize the soil. It goes on and on and on and on, right? Actually, putting sustainability and effectively putting nature on the balance sheet as a financial metric is, I think, a way that we can start to value it properly. And that's where things like scope 3 emissions, that's where the reporting regimes that are coming in around the world, including in Australia, I'm actually very excited about. I definitely think that it's a case of it's going to be a 20-year journey. It took 20 years for the financial industry to go from people yelling at each other on the Chicago bourse to the entire thing being a digital transaction and an electronic market. That took 20 years. It's going to take us at least 20 years to do that for nature. But I see that sustainability, and as you said, climate change is one aspect of that, but sustainability more generally, which is water quality, soil quality, biodiversity, the store of natural assets that are processing waste, that are cleaning the air and water, that are giving back beneficial microbes, that are managing populations of insects and so on. And telling us how well we are reducing our footprint, how well we are staying from those planetary boundaries where we start to burn up, irreversibly burn up some of these natural systems. The other thing that makes me optimistic is that nature is incredibly resilient. So when we do enact policies to withdraw from an area or stop polluting a particular area, wildlife comes back, nature comes back.
Mm.
And so nature is incredibly resilient. There's this, I'm positive on both sides. I don't believe that we've had irreversible impact on any of the natural systems. But to know that, we need the kind of data that Eartheye, with its incredible breadth of instruments and incredible breadth of suppliers, can provide. And I think it's kind of an unprecedented scale that not even governments have been able to muster the amount of data that you now are able to collect. And to be able to do what you said, which is to turn it into simple metrics, simple time histories around some of the critical markers of sustainability. Wow. I mean, how exciting is that? So, yeah, I'm ambitious for what we're going to be able to achieve together.
Absolutely. So I think the big takeaway there for me is, as you said, right, you can't overconsume, right? Everything is limited and the resources are limited, right? It's just like you can't really overspend beyond your paycheck. I mean, you can, but you land in trouble, right? Same thing with the nature. So the kind of sensors we have today helps us because, hyperspectral, right? So traditionally people have relied on multispectral and SAR, but now you have not just 30, 40 bands, now you have 400 bands. So we are going to bring 150 band hyperspectral next week, and we're going to bring 450 plus bands for the first time ever, including SWIR included, in about 3 to 4 weeks. So I'm excited about everything you just said there about keeping track of these natural resources, because a lot of those requires a very dense, wavelength, narrow wavelength, lots of bands, very specific bands, spectral signatures to be built. So exciting. So we, we're going to solve that sustainability problem, not just because governments burn landfills. So you have landfills, like every country has a big issue. So today, methane emission, as you know, Tim, is a huge issue. How do you help people detect methane emission, or in general, more greenhouse gas emission from a sustainability standpoint? And so that sort of activity, is where you're bringing some transparency. To your point earlier, but also we need transparency about overconsumption. And I think this is where I'm excited about what we can do. Yeah. Okay. Great. So do you have a view on, because end of the day when we talk about emissions and landfills, to me it's a byproduct of our overconsumptious world, right? Where plastics and number of other things that happen. So do you think there needs to be a supply chain visibility from produce to landfill, so that people can understand how landfills are getting created and greenhouse gas emissions are becoming source of landfills?
Yeah, I'm ambitious for that. I'm ambitious for the business opportunity that represents. I'm ambitious for the impact that we'll be able to have. And I believe that it's a no-brainer that we need to be able to create a circular economy
Mm.
where we are able to recover materials from our waste and
Yep.
do that to a much higher degree than we do. And I think that we also need evidence to make those policy decisions and to get people to change behavior. So I think having good, trustworthy data that is something that benefits everybody, and that's one of our challenges, is to make sure that that data can be trusted, that
Mm.
we don't spin that data, that
Mm.
we literally act in a very, very neutral and trusted way, so
Mm.
that smart decisions, can be made. That's also a challenge. But yes, no, I'm ambitious for the
Mm.
impact that we could have,
Yep.
and I want to see policy designs quoting Eartheye and Eartheye partner companies' data as part of showing the trends if we don't change, and showing the opportunities using those kind of predictive models if we do change. And that's
Yep.
where I think also AI can really help us forecast and help us ask really complicated and difficult questions and
Mm.
get sort of simple, smart answers that allow us to take action.
Right. I was going to ask you the final question around transparency, because you brought that magic word AI, which we touched on at the beginning. I know you're a big Gen AI adapter. Where do you see this satellite data, digital and Gen AI, LLMs or small LLMs all coming together? What does that world look like in the future, if you were to paint a picture of the next 1, 3, 5 years?
In a very kind of broad brush sense, Earth observation data has actually been the realm of wizards and specialists and people who are map makers and geospatial experts, right? It's expert, expert, expert. And so, yes, we can go to Google Maps and we get a nice picture that helps us navigate, that helps us see where there are rivers and mountains and borders and so forth. But actually digging deeper into the data very quickly becomes the realm of an expert. So, why is NDVI valuable to me when growing crops? Why is this other metric or this other metric or this other metric important to me when I'm trying to make a decision about an intensive farming process, or the price that I should be paying to subsistence farmers for this product, or the rate of interest that I should be charging to lend money for people to buy seed, or a whole host of other business decisions in the supply chain of food and fiber, and now biodiversity, water, infrastructure, etc. And the answer is that AI and machine learning, but AI in particular and LLMs specifically, are a brilliant interface to allow you to ask smart questions and not have to have that specialist knowledge. And now, so the new skill that I think we're all in the process of learning is how to work with AIs to, of course, manage the challenges that these models have, especially the early models around hallucinating, and at the same time, which actually is not that difficult to do, you can definitely test them and understand the kinds of questions where you get good answers and where they can drift. And it seems that some of the smaller models that have been trained in more specific areas are actually better at this than the larger models. That's kind of what we're learning. So my view is that the actual UX, the user experience that the average person will have to interrogate much more sophisticated Earth observation data is about to dramatically improve thanks to
Mm,
AI. And then that is going to reveal a whole lot of new questions, powerful, valuable questions that we want the end users to be asking. And that is also going to inform, okay, what kind of sensors do we need? What kind of data do we need to collect? Which of these models is credible or not? So I see a great feedback loop from the user base and the kind of questions they're asking. And I also see that we as practitioners are going to develop better and better AI solutions and make sure that those are things that can be transparently, again, that word, analyzed, assessed, reviewed, tested, and accepted as a source of great facts. And I think that's the opportunity. Obviously, in the era of generative AI, we've got to worry about generating data. And so we've also got to change how all of our satellites are set up, all the hardware we're using, in fact, and a whole range of other elements in the space supply chain need to be changed in order that we can have trust in the data that's collected and that we can prove that it wasn't just generated by an AI. So there's a lot of work to do to create, this new digital infrastructure for preserving and protecting the world to making better decisions. There's a ton of work we've got to do, but I'm excited, and I'm excited that Eartheye is kind of at the front of that
mm,
bleeding edge. And it feels like we're doing amazing work using digital and space for future generations of people
mm.
on planet Earth.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this is early days for us too. So, today we deliver, as you know, we deliver information feeds, which is essentially automatic extraction of information of interest to the customer, concerned customer, whether, as I mentioned, counting trees or understanding flood extent or oil spill, locations of oil spills or deforestation and so forth. So these are all, as you rightly said, deploying computer vision machine learning models on the fly, on the data, on the task data. But what I see that as all is they are lagging indicators, and they are the outcome of the climate change sustainability. They are lagging indicators we are picking up as the events unfold and letting people know. What I'm excited about or want to sort of prosecute the case, could we pick up leading indicators? Like, for example, we have methane emission we pick up today and we create a trend line. What does that methane emission happening in a country or in the region, what impact is going to have downstream to the contributing the lagging indicator we are picking up? So it's a very interesting problem to your characterization. It's a feedback loop, right? How do we
It's a terrific
monitor?
example.
Yeah,
It's a terrific example, Shankar. And, another one is we talk about cutting down trees. In some cases, if you want to accelerate the growth of carbon sequestering trees, sometimes actually you go and do that. You go into a particular area and you do take out a certain population of those trees. And is there a way to do that in such a way that you're actually increasing the system's ability to absorb carbon over time? That's a landscape intervention. And so that's an example of where you could say, okay, we've got these leading indicators, and what we expect is because we've applied this protocol, let's take out this kind of tree, this kind of age tree, or this kind of
yeah,
scale of tree from this area. We expect over the next 5 years to
correct,
exceed the baseline that has been established if we did nothing. And that's the kind of decisions that we would like to start to be data driven about,
right.
not just, necessarily using information that has been traditionally managed or is not managed at all. And so those kinds of practices, gosh, how do we bring those into our system? That's huge opportunity, a ton of work, but it's also a huge
Hmm.
opportunity to then provide that feedback loop you're describing.
Yeah, no, wonderful. Great, great. In the interest of time, we will come to the very last question. You've been very kind with your time, Tim. Transparency. Tell us why transparency matters to you, because the time I have spent with you since 2017, you talk about that the most. Everything has, but in the world of, satellite data and how do you draw the line between transparency and security? I think I'll stop here and get that point of view from you before I proceed.
So I think that the precedent has been set in meteorology, right? So there is an amazing international multilateral agreement around meteorological data. And in fact, today even countries that are fighting with each other, like Ukraine and Russia, still exchange meteorological data because they see that there is this mutual benefit. They have sensors across Ukraine, they have sensors across Russia, they have a party to these multilateral agreements where they all share that data. And so there's this net benefit that far outweighs holding on to that data, even in the case of wartime. It's an
Mm,
extraordinary reality. And so for me, you are doing something under the open sky, you're in land. And so unless you want to cover everything with plastic so nobody can see it, you will be able to be seen from space. And if you have the ability to be transparent about that and ideally collect that data and report that data in a way that perhaps is at arm's length from a nation state's own strategic objectives. And in that case, we're probably going to need several organizations like Eartheye to be doing that to make sure that there's, cross calibration and ability to be able to certainly verify whether information is being preserved. But you create trust in the system. And at the end of the day, functioning democracy requires trust. It requires a belief in a consistent set of facts. When that breaks down, democracy is in trouble. When that breaks down, the advantage we have as a species to tell ourselves a story, to marshal our resources, to change our behaviors rapidly to respond to a threat or to deal with a situation, that becomes a huge strength for us. And when we don't have that transparency, when we don't trust each other, when we're observing each other, askance, and we don't think there's a good faith exchange going on, actually that makes all of us weaker. So for me, looking at it long term, thinking about the future, setting that example of transparency is the essence of what we do. It in fact has been the foundation of what I believe the Western values and ultimately global humanitarian values are based on. And I'm a huge believer in that sort of post World War II generations lessons to us. Avoid these things and there will be peace. And transparency is a way to underpin that rules-based order. We especially live in complicated and difficult times where there are major actors and forces that are trying to undermine that. And so I think it's even more important than ever that grown-ups like us are standing up for those values, those principles, and allowing us to have intelligent adult debates about how to protect this extraordinary planet for our children, for their generations of children to come. And that we want to be remembered as people who created that legacy of trust, of data, of decision making that made this planet sustainable and allowed future generations to thrive and do incredible things and not have lives that are short and brutal and ignorant and difficult. And I think
mm.
that's my hope. That's my life goal.
Wow. How can you even have a follow-up question to that? You already answered a couple of follow-ups I had to the first question. So I will stop there with the final question. What is one thing that excites you about Eartheye Space, given that you are an investor and an advisor to us? What have you been excited about our mission or what we do or what you think we should be doing?
I'm super excited to see how customers are going to start to use the services to really engage with these topics in a meaningful way, to move interventions and decisions from the realm of, well, this seems like the right thing to do. We all want to get behind the general sentiment of dealing with climate change, the general sentiment of becoming sustainable, to actually saying, this is smart business. This is smart politics. This is smart social policy. We would be dumb not to do this. And good quality data is essential to that. And that's what I believe Eartheye provide. To bring it from the realm of what might be possible to this is how we have achieved incredible outcomes. And this is why our society, natural environment, and our economies are thriving because we've been able to implement the learnings that we've had from the Eartheye platform. That's what I want to see. That excites me. And I'm especially excited to see how you and your team are totally aligned in that vision and are tackling that head on. And I can't wait to hear more of the amazing stories that you've been uncovering over the next few months and years to come.
Now that we are aligned on that for sure. We want to your point there, we want to almost become a verb, right? So we earthide it. So we got that information and the insight um, through the services of Eartheye or through the Eartheye platform. Uh, Tim, unless you have any final thoughts, thank you so much for your time. Would you have any final thoughts to wrap this up?
Thank you for having me, Shankar. Continue to make it great. And I hope the audience enjoyed our chat.
Thank you. I'm sure they all did, as much as I did. Thank you. Thank you, Tim. Thanks for your time. Bye bye.